Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Soulful Producers. My name is Enrique, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to make 3 different kinds of R&B synths in Serum. We're going to be covering how to make a pad, a key, and a lead sound. When I was getting into R&B production, a lot of the presets that I found in different kinds of synths and VSTs just sounded a little too pop or too electronic for my taste. So whenever I would play chords on top of R&B drums with these sounds, it would just sound completely out of context. So this made me want to learn how to make my own R&B synths in Serum. I started going through a lot of YouTube tutorials and then just messing with Serum on my own. And after a lot of trial and error, I really started to find that sound that I love. So today I'm going to show you some examples from an R&B synth collection that I made for Serum. The collection is called Soulful Keys Volume 1 and you can find it at soulfulproducers.com. Before we dive in, I also just want to let you know that we have a Facebook community for R&B producers. It's also called Soulful Producers and the link is in the description. And we also just opened an Instagram and TikTok where we share a lot of cool production tips, chord progressions, and many more stuff. It's all called Soulful Producers, so be sure to check that out. So here's a little vibe that I made using a pad, a key, and a lead sound from our Soulful Keys Volume 1 collection. I actually took this chord progression from one of our Instagram and TikTok videos. I'm telling you, we share some pretty cool stuff there. So when it comes to making your own synth, there are 3 main principles that will guide you through the process. The first one is the basic sound, so just the oscillator and the envelope. Just by messing with these 2, without adding any filters or effects or anything, you'll start envisioning the foundation of the sound. What kind of harmonic content it's going to have, how big it's going to be, how full or how pure it's going to be. And then how that volume envelope is going to move. Is it going to be slow and gliding up to the desired volume? Or is it going to come in right away? The second main element is going to be your filter and your filter envelope. Once you have a basic sound going, adding that filter and an envelope to that filter is going to give that sound some new character. And then the third main element is going to be modulations and effects. This is where you start assigning your envelope and your LFO to different parameters and also messing with the effects in Serum like reverb, delay, chorus, and all that. So to recap, we have the basic sound, which is just the oscillator and the main envelope. Then we have the filter and the filter envelope. And then we have modulations and effects. So with these principles in mind, let's check out the pad first. This is just a pad sound. I love this pad. It's called Glide Midnight Drive and it's from our Soulful Keys Volume 1 collection. So starting with the basic sound, just oscillator and main envelope. In R&B pads, the most common types of waves are going to be sine, triangle, and square. It's like a balance between pure tones like sine waves and then something with a little more bite without being too electronic, like triangle and squares. These 2 types of waves are also a little more old school. Triangle and square waves are something that you would find in vintage synths as well. So any of these 3 will get the job done pretty well. In this pad, I'm actually using a saw wave, but I'm filtering it out a good amount so it's not too bitey or too electronic. And then on the envelope, the main thing for pads is going to be your attack. So you want it to be anywhere from medium to slow to make sure that the main volume of it really takes some time to glide up. Then the decay, sustain, and release are really up to personal preference. Just make sure you get that attack feeling right. Then on the filter, for pads, I don't really like having a lot of resonance because I like my pads to sound full and not too nasal. When we bump the resonance in a pad, it gets a little distracting. Check it out. It's like too in your face. That's where the lead should be, or the vocal or other elements. I don't want my pad to be all distracting like that. And then the actual cutoff frequency and the amount of envelope that you send to the cutoff is gonna depend a lot on how epic you want your pad to be and how upfront in the mix you want it. If you want it to be nice and tucked in the background, you might want to bring that cutoff frequency down a good amount. And if you want it to feel a little more epic, you can increase that envelope amount. It feels pretty huge there, but now it's filling up a lot of space. So it's going to depend on how many elements you have in your mix and where you want everything to be. For this vibe, I kind of like it around here. And then when it comes to modulations and effects on pads, here are a couple things I love to do to give it the R&B and old school kind of vibe. So first, I'll usually send one of my LFOs to the cutoff frequency of the filter, and I'll just mess with that a little bit until I get like a cool vibe going on. On this one, I'm just doing a slope that goes down. And then something that's going to give it that classic vintage synth kind of vibe is sending one of your LFOs to the warp on each oscillator. And specifically the PWM, or pulse width modulation, is something that you would find on a Juno, for example. So it's really going to give it that vintage kind of vibe on the synth. And then on the effects side of things, I also like sending the LFO to different parameters of the effects, especially the vibe effects like flanger, phaser, and chorus. I like to just go a little crazy with that and send the LFO to random things to make it just vibe and be different. A cool little thing that you can do is have a custom LFO or an envelope go to the mix knob of different effects. That way the amount of any effects is increasing gradually in any amount that you want. And once you add all those elements and really mess with it, you'll end up with a really nice sounding pad that you can then go ahead and save and tweak and use on any of your productions. Such a vibe. Then when it comes to keys, we're sort of emulating some pure kind of sounds, something like a Rhodes or a real piano, both of which have real strings. And whenever you have real strings on an instrument, the wave is sort of going to look like a sine wave, with some variations here and there depending on the instrument. So for our basic sound when it comes to RnB keys, I usually go for sine waves or rounded shapes, something like a rounded saw or a rounded square kind of thing. Notice how in this one I'm literally using 2 sine waves, and the second one is just tuned an octave higher. It's super cool having that higher octave with a bit of detune. It really gives it a lot of vibe. Then on the envelope, when it comes to RnB keys, and just keys in particular, you really want to follow these guidelines. So the attack has to be instant, because like on a real piano, as soon as you press the key, you get the sound, right? It's not like you play it and then the sound comes after. It's right away. So instant attack. Then the decay, you want it to be pretty long, because when you play that note on a piano and you hold it, it's going to take a little while to decay and fade away. The sustain, you want it to be pretty low, because when you play that note, it's not like it's staying at the same volume all the time, like a synth would do. It comes down right away. And then for the release, you want to have sort of a medium to long release, because whenever you let go of that note, the actual string inside the piano is still ringing a bit. So if you want to achieve something close to a real key sound, these are the guidelines you want to follow. Then when it comes to the filter side of things on your keys, you want to have anywhere between a little to a good amount of resonance, because that's going to give it a good amount of character and uniqueness. It's going to make the sound pop out a little more. You see how on keys the resonance actually sounds really good? On the pad it sounded nasty, it was horrible. But on keys it works so nicely. Then the cutoff frequency, you want it to be somewhere around the middle, because that way you can assign a filter envelope to it and you can have it open. And that's going to give it that plucky sound that you have on keyboards. Messing with that cutoff frequency and the envelope amount that you send to it is really going to define that sound, so make sure you get that right with your mix and everything. And lastly, when it comes to modulations and effects on your RnB keys, there are a couple things that you can do to make it a little more interesting. So to give it a bit of that old school detuned kind of sound, what I like to do is take an LFO and just draw some weird variations like this, and I'll send that to the fine tuning of one of my oscillators. And that's going to be sort of like putting RC20 or any kind of detuning plugin. It's going to make it sound a little more real and vintage. Notice what happens when I increase that amount. It goes crazy. But in a controlled amount, it's super nice. And then you can also mess around by sending your envelope to different things. You could send it to like the mix knob of your chorus or your flanger or something like that. And that will make the amount of your effect move in the same way as the volume envelope of your whole thing. You could also send the envelope to the detune, and that way you're actually getting more stereo width as soon as you play the keyboard. Just some cool little things that you can do with your keys to give them more spice. And then when it comes to your leads, you want to be super careful, because your leads, they're very easy to overdo and get them too electronic or too poppy. So you really want to make sure that they're vibing, that they're not too buzzy, and that they're not too digital. Notice how this lead sound, while being a little buzzy and a little digital, still has a good amount of vibe, and it's not overdone. You really want to make sure that all these elements, you're getting them to fit right in the mix. So when it comes to R&B leads, the main kind of wave that I like to use are triangles, saws, squares, and Juno kind of waves, or any sort of vintage synth kind of wave. For this lead, I use the Juno wave on both, and I just have different wavetable positions on them. Then on the envelope, there are a couple things to consider to give it that R&B vibe. The attack, you want to have it anywhere from fast to medium. I don't really like having it instantly because then it's just going to feel like a key. I like having just a bit of a fast glide up to that volume, so it's like wah, wah, wah. It really makes it feel a little more soulful. The decay is really just going to be up to taste. You can just mess with that and see what works better. And the sustain, you want to be sure it's anywhere from medium to low. Because something that will definitely make it sound like an electronic lead is having a very high sustain. Just having it be at the same volume all the time. Check it out. Versus. It's a bit of a subtle difference, but when you're playing a lot of notes, and especially when you're holding them out, it's going to be very noticeable. And then the release is really just going to be up to taste. So the main things to consider on the envelope are the attack and the sustain. Attack anywhere from fast to medium, and sustain anywhere from medium to low. Then moving on to the filter, the resonance, it's really up to taste. You can just mess with it and see what works better. On this particular lead, if we go too high in the resonance, it starts sounding a little too nasal, but somewhere around here is pretty nice. And then for leads, you want to make sure that your cutoff is somewhere on the low to middle side of things, so that when you assign your envelope to it, it can actually move the cutoff up and make it feel like it's opening to give it that epic feel. And then moving to modulations and effects, there are some little things that you can do here and there to make it more interesting. For example, I'm sending my main envelope to the bend on the second oscillator. That's sort of going to make it feel like it's a guitar doing like some bends and vibrato kind of stuff. Just some cool things to spice up the sound a little and give it more personality. I also have my second envelope going to the drive amount in the distortion, just to make it have a little more attack and girth to it, but super instantly. Notice that the second envelope is super fast. Little things like that are going to make your sound very unique. And then we're also applying that trick that we did with the keys, where we send the LFO to the fine tuning of the oscillators. So this LFO1 I'm sending to the fine tuning of my first oscillator, and then LFO2 is a little different, and I'm sending it to the fine tuning of my second oscillator. And that's going to make the sound have a little bit of detuning and some character to it. So that's it for this tutorial, guys. I just wanted to go over 3 different kinds of R&B synths in Serum, using our collection Soulful Keys Volume 1 as an example. This collection has some of my favorite sounds for R&B. I use these all the time in my productions, and I think that you're gonna love them too. You can find it at our website, soulfulproducers.com, and it's only $15. It's got over 50 presets, from keys to pads to leads to brass to basses, even plugs, you name it. Don't forget to check out our Facebook community. The link is in the description below. And also make sure to go to our Instagram and TikTok, where we share chord progressions, production tips, and many more stuff. Here on the screen is that chord progression from this vibe we made today. And I got this chord progression from one of our Instagram and TikTok videos, so be sure to check that out. That's it for today, friends. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.